One of the questions I've got for you is, what are some of the biggest breakthroughs you've seen people experience through your coaching?
This entire identity and self acceptance,
What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
just making sure you're taking time to sit and breathe, be still, and you will know.
Is there a book that really shaped the way you think about leadership or personal growth?
Is it okay if I mention two?
Welcome to I'm Up, He Sees Me, I'm Down. Conversations on leadership, faith, and resilience with Mike Turner. This show is proudly sponsored by Alamo Tech and Mission Solution Partners.
In this episode, Mike sits down with self-leadership coach Jordan White to explore what really matters to understand yourself before trying to lead others. Jordan's work focuses on helping understand how they create value in the world, personally, professionally, and spiritually. Through his coaching and the Value Agentic Self-Leadership Development Program, he helps individuals identify their thinking patterns, decision-making, and the ways they either create or unintentionally diminish value in their lives. The conversation also dives into Jordan's personal story, including navigating identity growing up in his biracial household, his journey towards spiritual exploration, and how those experiences shaped his approach to coaching and leadership. Throughout this episode, Mike and Jordan discuss spirituality, leadership, growth, identity shifts, and why real leadership often begins with self-awareness rather than strategy. Thank you for joining us, Jordan, on another episode. I'm Up, He Sees Me, I'm Down. I'm so glad to have you on here. It's really a great time, and I just wanted to welcome you to the show.
Yeah. Hey, Mike, it's a pleasure to be with you, my friend. I'm really honored to be a part of it.
Thank you. So, Jordan, so before we get into your work as a coach, which I think is pretty amazing in itself, I'd love for people to get to know you a little bit, because I think that's an extremely important part of your journey. So tell us a little bit about your background and the journey that led you into coaching.
Yeah, sure. I get that. I think it's there's a lot of surface level stuff out there, and you kind of want to know like who's actually behind the work. So
Yeah,
I'm happy to
absolutely.
share a little bit more for sure. I grew up here in Denver, Colorado, where I still live. My wife and I are here, and I grew up kind of as you mentioned in a biracial household, and have an athletic background as well. So all that said, and I'm sure we'll get around to more of that later, but as I made my way through sports and my athletic background, I started to recognize that, being part of a team and everyone having kind of their unique way of, contributing to a team. So yeah, Mike, I grew up here in Denver, and where I still am here with my wife, and we love it here. It's a great area, and I do a lot of stuff in the community here, but I'm also working with folks across the nation, doing my self leadership work. But what got me into that was I actually have an athletic background. So I played college basketball, and throughout that time, there's just so many traits. Being on a team, unique people bringing their own strengths to really contribute to a bigger picture. I mean, a lot of that really crossed over into my corporate career. So I worked at a credit union for almost 10 years before I started my coaching practice. And what I was finding was that, a lot of that athletic background was kind of shaping my leadership style or my philosophy. And it's really inspired by, Phil Jackson. And he talks a lot about the concept of oneness. And, he's a spiritual guy as well. So I was inspired by him in my leadership style, and really just helping people uniquely bring out the best of themselves so they could contribute and feel like they were part of something, and contribute to the bigger picture of at the time the credit union. And
Right. Oh, I get that.
yeah, and during that time, things were going well. I was meeting KPIs. I was, my team was happy overall, but I was feeling like there was a little more of a calling for me, and
Yeah.
so that led to me actually seeking out a master's in leadership and communication. And during that time is actually where I discovered professional coaching. And I learned that a lot of either high performing leaders or even individual contributors, they had someone that they could talk to strategically. They had a coach, they had a mentor, they had some type of person that was in their corner that really wanted to see them win and to see them improve and to see them grow. So that was fascinating to me, fascinating enough to actually seek out a coach on my own. And I worked with her for about 2 years, and she's actually the one that introduced me to the self leadership work that we're gonna probably dive into today.
We
And
love it. Yeah. But before we get into all that, I don't want my audience and your audience to really skip over this part because I think,
Mhm.
well, I think this is a really important piece. You know, when we had our conversation together and we were just talking, I think this kind of took me a little bit off guard because you talked about
Yeah,
your biracial household, and so growing up, you talked about how you went to one type of school and then you had to shift to another school. So I want my audience to really understand what that was like and going up against that, being that you are biracial and that
yeah.
you couldn't find a home on either side in a way. And I don't want to speak for you, so I'll let you speak.
No, yeah, I appreciate you making space for that, Mike. And maybe if someone's watching this, they may not have known that,
Yeah,
because and that was part of the struggle growing up was, being white passing, almost like being so fair skinned, so light skinned that, you know, people on both sides had no idea that
right,
that I am biracial.
right,
So yeah, growing up in my childhood, I mean, we bounced around a little bit, but most of my elementary, middle, and into early high school, my first 2 years of high school, I was in a predominantly white area. So it was, I grew up around that, but there was kind of this sense of not necessarily feeling like I fully belonged.
right.
Because eventually it did get out, and people would see my dad show up to parent teacher conferences and whose kid is
Yeah.
yours type
And
thing,
then they
right?
start putting it together. And so did that change the way people treated you or interacted with you? Or was that just something internally you were feeling?
Yeah, I mean a little bit of both. You
Hmm.
know, and that I think I noticed more of that in high school. When people's stronger opinions start to show up, and how you're kind of orienting and seeing the world starts to show up a little bit more. People called out racial slurs to me in high school, and
Yeah,
um, kind of almost use that as a way to I wouldn't call it as far as bullying, but like kind of like keep me at a distance. It felt
yeah,
like there
yeah.
were definitely plenty of those experiences.
Right, because in high school, we all have the worst of the stories for sure.
Sure.
There's poverty, so the kid that can't afford the
Mhm.
name brand, he gets picked on. I'm sure the race thing comes up on both sides. And when you're sitting right in the middle between the two, it's like, you know, at least people that have one side or the other to kind of fall back and go, well,
Right.
I'm white or I'm Hispanic or I'm black or whatever the case is. But man, I could not imagine what growing up that did for you. But on the other side of it, was there one moment where you started asking deeper questions about your identity and purpose?
Yeah. Well, quick chime in on that too, Mike. I'm actually working on a counseling degree, so a master's in
Okay.
counseling, and
Yeah.
there's a lot that happens, like you said, throughout adolescence. And
Right.
there's so much your body is experiencing, and of course, like brain development wise. So
Yeah.
yeah, that was a lot to kind of manage. And then a big part of that too is like finding your clique, finding
Yeah.
right like brotherhood
Whatever you
or
can, you're belonging, right? Yeah.
exactly. Yeah.
Sure.
So I just yeah, I appreciate you saying that because there were times where that was difficult. But yeah, as far as really starting to embrace that, I
Hmm.
think was just as I navigated college and started to move into my early 20s and really seeing that as a gift. And
Oh,
like
yeah. I can
growing
see
up
that.
with a very blended family, even like my aunties on my mom's side, my white side,
Yeah.
married into people of color. So like you show up for holidays and you got a little bit of
Oh, yeah.
everything, like on
Yeah.
the Thanksgiving spread, you know what I mean?
I get it.
And
Yeah, I have my nieces and my nephews are a mixed Hispanic and
yeah,
black. So
yeah.
our Thanksgiving is a mix of everything
Hmm.
and it's still normal to us, right? Because that's what we put together. So
Exactly.
yeah. Um, so that's awesome, man. So yeah, so you grew up, and I think this makes you a strong leader. I mean, this makes when you go through something like that, it just builds strength into you. You have a sense of empathy into others that you're like, I can see where you're coming from. I can see your point of view. I can understand this, that, whatever it is. So I appreciated that
Yeah.
part of what you were mentioned to me and shared with me. So one of the topics that came up when we were talked earlier was, kind of like you were saying, going through a discovery, both spiritually and personal growth. And so where does spirituality fit in your life today? How did that kind of come to be?
Yeah, as probably for most people can relate. I mean, spirituality and religion and like all of that. That can be a windy road. But yeah, as far as today goes, spirituality is a really important part of my life. I mean, really
Right.
developing spiritually and leaning into that. I'm part of the science of mind religion. So I go to it's called Mile High Church here in Denver, and really what that's about is spiritual psychology. And thinking about you know there is this source that connects all of us together, and really just learning to tap more into that and recognizing that we're all unique expressions of that. And so that's more of an inward experience, so
Right.
inside out experience of like
Right.
really going in to develop spiritually. So you've now tapped into the reserves to be in service outside,
Right.
and
Oh, I love that.
so yeah, it's a big part of my life. It's something I go to not only to our normal talks on Sunday, but there's classes they offer, and I look forward to continuing to be part of that community and be a leader, hopefully within that community down the road.
Right. And so you mentioned there's a lot of your thinking and influenced by the teachings of philosopher Robert Hartman. And so
Mhm.
what drew you to that kind of work?
Yeah, so I had mentioned earlier, my coach was the one that introduced me to the valuegenic self
Right.
leadership work. So valuegenic meaning value generative. And Robert Hartman, so he has an interesting, fascinating story. I mean, he grew up in the rise of the Nazi regime, and he was starting to observe that not only was evil starting to shape around him, but it was actually there was a system being built around it. So he thought to himself, that can be organized at a systemic level, almost wiping out an entire group of people.
Right.
Why can't the opposite be true? So that was really his mission, was to answer what in the world is actually good. And he was able to actually codify and map out what he calls the hierarchy of value. And so there's structures of value that help actually guide our decisions every day, whether we're conscious of it or not. So his philosophy, and it actually turned into a science, formal axiology, is really the study of value, the study of value creation, and how it exists in our communities, in our workplaces, in ourselves. So really his idea was to help people understand how you're valuing as a verb is actually going to indicate how you're making decisions in your life, right? So if we become aware of that, then we can actually start reshaping our thinking to be more aligned with value creation, because ultimately, hopefully you agree and hopefully your listeners agree, really the ultimate high in life is to be creating value and to be being around valuable things, or things that are valuable to us. You mentioned your family and your
Right.
grandchildren, right? Like, what greater thing, right?
Right.
So if we can be more aligned with that, with our thinking, then we can actually start making some really incredible decisions, and have incredible influence in our personal and professional life.
Oh, I love that. That just, I think everybody feels that ultimately, even if they don't, you know, say it out loud, but that's
Yeah.
ultimately like we are really not put on this earth to be, makers of money, to be material possession people. It's great that we have nice things, all that, but that's not really the ultimate goal. That's really about the journey, and it's about, like you said, value, yours, others, things around you. Someone on their deathbed, I'll just say this, and hopefully it makes it on the show or not, we'll see. But someone on their deathbed, they don't go, what is their last thing you want? They don't say, oh, I want more money, I want a new car. No, they say, I want more time. right?
Yeah.
And when they look back, they're not looking back at the time when they bought that Ferrari unless that had a certain way that they made them feel or whatever, and then the memory. So ultimately, it's about time and memory, because
Mhm.
ultimately, that's all you have in the end is whatever time you have left on this planet and the memories in which you made to look back at. I just always carry that with me because I think that's important. And I think you can take that with your audience and you can say, hey, look, if you're debating on taking that vacation with your family, don't debate on that. Take that vacation with your family. Obviously, if you can afford it and stuff, but it's about the time. It's about spending that time with your kids, with your family, and all that stuff. So awesome. That's really awesome. So one of the things is how does that translate into leadership or coaching?
Yeah. So, the self leadership program that I guide people through, so I call it a hybrid of coaching and really teaching, right? Like you're
Right,
learning, it's almost like going to a mini class and,
right,
and learning, kind of getting trained in this science. But ultimately, I mean, this is the concepts and the principles of formal axiology and value creation is what led me to be a high performing leader in my workplace, because I was then starting to see and reprioritize what is of highest value, right? Where is value being diminished potentially on this team? Where are the opportunities to create more value? So if you have access to actually seeing that more clearly, that can impact all types of leadership decisions, right? Like from
yeah,
a conceptual level, as you're creating standard operating procedures, right? Like what's the purpose of it? And what are the attributes required to fulfill that purpose? That's the definition of good, which we use in um, the self leadership program. Something is good to the degree that it has all the attributes required to fulfill its purpose, right? So we kind of look at that backwards. The purpose of this SOP is to blank. Okay, so what attributes do we need to plug into that purpose for it to happen? Right. So again, like it's less, you get so much time back because
mhm,
again, like you're seeing what uh, has more value more easily, right? And then of course on the people side, hopefully the leaders listening agree. I mean, a lot of the challenging part of leadership is more so the people stuff, right?
yeah,
And again, back to that hierarchy of value that Hartman discovered. There's at the bottom of the hierarchy is systemic value, right? So this is a concept. If we think about that as a head, in the
right,
middle is extrinsic value. So think of that as the hands. That's what we're doing,
right,
right? And then at the top is intrinsic value, which is could be looked at as a heart, right? Like
right,
what's the goodness that's actually being created. And within a workplace, that could also be seen looked at. What's the plan at the bottom? What's
right,
the process in the middle? And how is this going to impact the people, right, at the top? So again, it's the idea is that those are working in harmony with each other, that you're thinking about those and creating value up and down that hierarchy. But yeah, as far as I'd like to say I've always looked at people as individuals, right? Especially based on my own experience, and like how we talked about that a little bit earlier. But getting exposed to this work only ramped that up
right,
to really see each of us as one of one, right? Like there's only one Mike Turner in the entire universe,
right.
right? Like what a miracle that is,
Yeah,
man,
no,
right? And
it's
like
like
so
there's only
seeing
one Jordan White in the entire universe. Like, you know,
yeah, so starting to see everyone that way. I mean, really, a lot of people leave work because they what? They feel undervalued,
yes,
right? How many times
absolutely.
have you heard that? So if you're valuing someone more clearly and more accurately
Right.
based on, the science of formal axiology, then you're putting yourself in a really good position to be a great leader in whatever you want to accomplish.
I love that. And so, and that segues right into this next conversation that we're going to have. Your title is self leadership coach,
Hmm.
and so which is an interesting concept. So, what does self leadership actually mean?
Yeah. I tend to ask people what they think it means.
Yeah, yeah, no, that's
But yeah, I mean, to answer, I mean, like, a rhetorical one, but like, who's leading you, right? And so Hartman, he talks about the capital S self, right? So we've got this little s self and this capital S self. And the capital S self is more so the spiritual self, right? The what's going on in the inside, right? And like
Okay.
your actual spirit and
Right.
your intrinsic infinite uniqueness, right? But most of us are thinking about the little self, the ego self, right? The outward facing self. And we pour a lot into that. And again, that's human nature. I get it. I've contributed to that myself. Right, but the idea of self leadership is really helping people explore, who am I, right? And like Hartman talks about that in his book as well. Being able to answer that, like, what am I here for in the world? I'm asking some of those bigger questions and those deeper questions that require you to go inside, right? Like we're typically, at least, not gonna find that outside,
Right.
right? So,
Yeah.
um, I think I actually heard this at my church recently, but this quick story of, the gods were deliberating and they were thinking about where do we hide the highest power in the world, which is like our consciousness, right? Like
Right.
our spiritual consciousness. And one god said, let's hide it high in the stars, the sky, the stars. And, the other two were like, now, I think man is going to be able to get up there one day, right, and find it, right?
Right.
So another god was like, okay, let's hide it in the bottom of the ocean, and same thing, right? Like they figured, yeah, man's pretty determined, so
Yeah.
they're gonna explore the bottom of the ocean one day and probably find it there. And so after a little pause, the third god was like, you know what? I've got the answer. We've got to hide it inside. We've got to hide it in the human heart. Right. So we spend so much time, the point there, right, is we spend so much time searching and looking externally for the biggest answers for our lives. So self leadership is really switching that around, is like being in touch with who you are uniquely and celebrating that and leading from the inside out, right? So when you start leading yourself well, when you start seeing yourself more clearly as the intrinsic human that you are, the one of one human you are, with the unique gifts that you have, you're going to start then looking for that in other people,
Right.
right? So leading yourself well starts with, I'm sorry, leading others well starts with leading yourself well.
Oh, I love that. Yeah. So, what kind of patterns or blind spots do people typically discover when they go through your program?
Yeah. Well,
And I
as
know it's going to be unique for each person because it really is a discovery of
yeah.
themselves, but
Mhm.
they're, just give me an example or something you've seen that kind of could really resonate.
No, I appreciate you, yeah, kind of saying that. And, because it's just so unique for each person. And even how call them biases, like thinking
Right.
biases, how those even form is through your experience of life, right? Like something that happened to you as a kid or
Absolutely.
something that happened to you yesterday, right? Like that starts to shape how you think and value the world, or maybe overvalue something, disvalue something, etc. So, but to answer the question, some of the main patterns I see, especially with either emerging leaders or leaders in transition, is this idea of perfectionism. And I know this isn't anything new or groundbreaking, but when we start actually recognizing that that's an unachievable state and that it's
Mm.
actually causing more harm than it is value, then that's a really big awareness for people to actually uncover. So there's a thinking perspective that the assessment that I'm a practitioner of identifies, and it's called being at peace. And really, the irony of it is, most people overvalue that thinking perspective, right? So that means that they are thinking commonly that there's one perfect way to do something. There's a way I should be in the world. There's a way you, Mike, should be in the world. There's a way
Right.
that we should sit down and do this process. There's a way for
Right.
this. There's a way for that, right? And when you start hearing "should" a lot, it's pretty likely that that thinking bias is present.
Right.
So that's a main pattern that I see. And then another one is people just undervaluing enjoying what they're doing, right? So much of life and work becomes monotonous, right? And we start
Right.
to actually disvalue or undervalue the blessing that it is to actually have a job, to the blessing that it is to actually have kids to run to the store floor, right? Or to, to take them to, their little soccer game or whatever it is, right? So, those are a couple patterns that a lot of the people I work with, they're struggling with perfectionism, especially in today's world where there's so many potential solutions,
Yeah.
right? They're almost plagued.
Right.
Yeah, just kind of missing the actual value that's in front of them if they truly do, seek it out and appreciate it.
And so in your coaching world, a lot of your clients seem to be navigating major life transitions, like you're saying.
Yeah.
So, what is the typical person you like to work with, or
Mhm.
or do you find put value, you add value to the
Yeah.
system?
Yeah. No, you and I, we talked about, my athletic background a little earlier.
Yeah.
So, in my program, there's this idea of A game and B game. So A game thinking are your thinking assets,
Right.
right? And B game thinking are your thinking biases.
Okay.
Right, so the A game and B game tends to speak to most people, but a lot of my common clientele, if you will, have an athletic background, right?
Right.
So they know what it feels like to be in their A game on the field, or
Wow.
like on the track, or wherever they're performing well. Right. And they also know when they don't show up as their best. And that's really what this is about. Your A game is your best, your B game isn't.
Right.
And we've got, thinking perspectives that we can identify that are unique for each person that, we can tap into. So, that's a main thing. And as you said, many people are navigating transition. So, I'm a millennial. So, a lot of us are struggling, just with life in general. I mean, everything's
Right.
expensive. The whole American dream that was sold to us as we entered college. I mean, like, what does that even
And
matter?
I'm gonna throw this out there, and this will add some controversy to this podcast for sure.
Uh-huh.
But I'm gonna say, just stop listening to the boomers because their advice is so aged right now that they have no idea the
Sure.
economy that we live in. Like they're giving you advice from an economy that doesn't exist anymore. So stop taking advice from boomers. Let's just all agree to that. I'm a Gen Xer, but I'm gonna put that out there, and I would even go as far as saying some Gen Xers might want to use a little bit of distance. We take advice from them too,
Sure.
but anyways, but definitely for boomers, let's just stop taking advice on a 401k that none of us have. So
Yeah.
that's I'll just put that out there. But
Yeah.
anyways, yeah, no. So and I want to touch on this a little bit because you mentioned it. And I think you don't give yourself enough credit here. I think you're a high performer working in with athletes. I mean, those are high performing people. Like
Exactly.
the level that you have to be at the professional level, at the collegiate level, and then to have someone like you to walk beside them, man, that's the best thing that they could pick up the phone and call you and get
Mm.
that going. Because I think I too, I don't look like it now, but I played sports in high school, and I want to say, I wish I would have had somebody walking beside me that's done it, that understands the nuances of the sport, understands what it means to get up at old 5 o'clock in the morning to go work out before practice. Like the level of mental toughness that you have to have, you got to have something in the engine that not a lot of people have. And so I just wanted to put that out there for you, Jordan, because I think that's really important. So any of our guests that are really looking and they're trying to compete at a higher level, that Jordan is a good fit for you right there. Not to say you're not a good fit for others too that are transitioning to bigger things.
Sure.
The husband and wife team that are trying to be high performers in their entrepreneurship business. That also works too. I just think you can really find in sports those analogies and stuff. Being that you also played at the collegiate level as well. So very cool. So one thing I want to talk about too. So the role of vulnerability and growth, and I think this is going to kind of lead us into a couple questions that I'll rapid fire to you. But coaching often requires people to open up about their things that they have never talked about before. So, how do you create a safe environment for those kinds of conversations?
Wow, what a cool question.
Yeah.
Um, so if anyone out there listening has done their Myers-Briggs, I'm an INFP, so more so introverted leaning, and
Hmm.
a common trait of INFPs is that they can connect dots, right? So maybe something that we talk about, you know, 2 sessions ago,
Hmm.
uh, and there's something completely different coming up in, our current session, and then somehow those two things come together. Right? That's something that I'm proud of, being able to do, and I do feel like that's a unique gift. But what I'm really getting around to, Mike, is I believe listening is a love language.
Mm.
Right? And most people have heard of the common five. I think there's a sixth one. Right? And
Right.
how do we even get to know what the one of five is? It's by listening and truly hearing someone. Right?
Right.
And so that is at the deepest core, especially acknowledging the vulnerability it does take. I mean, sitting there and listening to someone is really the way in, to creating a psychologically safe environment. And when people feel safe, right, that's the
That's where
soil
the
for
yeah,
that's the
and
soil for
that's where the
growth.
real work happens, right there. 'Cause when they start
Exactly.
feeling safe, then the guardrails or whatever the borders that are put up, the walls, those start to come down, and then you can start really, like you said, connecting the dots,
Yep.
making progress. So let's throw out some accolades here real quick because I think
Mm.
one of the questions I've got for you is what are some of the biggest breakthroughs you've seen people experience through your coaching?
This entire identity and self-acceptance is something that isn't as maybe tangible,
Mm.
but
Yeah.
it's something you can feel. I mean, if you think about someone who's maybe come out of like a deeper depression, or like, some crippling anxiety, for example, and you see them, after maybe 6 months or a year or something like that, they look a little different, right? They may have a little glow or something like that. So, that's at the deepest core. I mean, that type of work is happening if people allow themselves to get there.
So it's the
So
small perspective shifts over time that you're seeing. Now you can look back with a big lens and say,
mhm,
look where you've come from. Look where you started with this depression and look where you're at now. You've got goals
yeah,
and things that you want to accomplish in life and you're not laying on the couch all day and
yeah,
just all the, but from them, they're just like, oh yeah, and they have to probably put it together like, that they've come a long way. So,
man, yeah, well said. And something I talk about too is I love when people start using the word notice when they're talking about their thinking and when they're
mhm.
talking about their behavior.
They become
Right.
start
So
start becoming self-aware.
yeah,
Yeah,
like shifting from, I am this, to, hey, I noticed this.
yeah,
Right. And now you're stepping back and really starting to observe yourself and become more self-aware. And when we become more aware, Carl Jung said, until we bring the conscious, or excuse me, until we bring the unconscious into our consciousness, it'll dictate our lives, and we'll call it fate. Right.
yes,
So the idea is like when we start becoming more self-aware, we open ourselves up to the option of choice and making choices. And there's a menu of them constantly in front of us. So I train people to choose the choices or make the decisions that are going to generate the most value. Right. So, I mean, another, I guess, like more practical example, I worked with someone we worked together for 2 years, and I want to be careful with how I'm sharing, but she had
sure,
a pretty traumatic, probably past what one could imagine, upbringing, um,
right,
and had a lot of, yeah, just ugly stuff that she experienced, to the point where she never was going to trust a man again in her entire life.
right,
And so again, like back to that listening,
yeah,
that level of listening, and that level of gentleness, and that level of non-judgment,
yeah,
that allowed for us to actually work together. So she said yes to that, which was a blessing in itself. And then, 2 years later, she actually published a book and shared her story
amazing.
that she was so ashamed of, so deeply ashamed of, and is now
Yeah.
touring, and she's actually doing amazing work in the community, and is doing a lot of advocacy work, and it all started with, right, a choice,
Yeah.
and a choice for us to work together, and a choice for us to stay committed in that vulnerable, kind of scary place, and once people cross over that bridge, it's such an incredible, I might even tear up now. I mean, just like recognizing, it's unrecognizable who that person was when we first started to when she published that book. Such a proud moment for, everyone involved. And I just feel humbled to be a part of that.
That is awesome, man, that you got to experience that and help somebody. So something else that I wanted to talk about, because your heart is there for all these things, but you're also working on building a community specifically for men. So tell us a little bit about that initiative as well.
Yeah. Yeah. So, as I've been navigating my coaching journey, it's probably kind of 50-50 at this point, men and women, identifying men and women. But as as I've been just kind of sitting back and observing and like thinking about what, challenges people are bringing to the table, if it's more on the personal side, I was starting to hear a lot from my women clients about either their husband or a brother that was struggling, or another male in their life, that was just having a difficult time. And, from my male clients, a lot of what you just talked about, not a lot of them had a whole bunch of experience with vulnerability and like having someone there to like walk alongside them through something and become more emotionally, intelligent and just develop as a healthy human. Right. So over time, a few of my buddies and the idea came up, like I'm gonna offer you all, for us to actually go through my self-leadership program together as a community.
Yeah.
Right. So several of us went through it, and just the community that started to build, the brotherhood that started to build, and who we started to become together, right?
Yeah.
And how our relationships with our, wives or fiancés or girlfriends or whatever it may be, were adjusting for the better. A couple of them are dads, right? Like how parenting was starting to adjust, like all of it. It was just having so many great benefits. So that was kind of the birth of it. It was, we may have something here. So we meet once a month, over Zoom, check in with each other, and it's not just a, hey man, how are your bets doing, or what's like, how's your bracket looking? We're actually talking about like some of the, like the core, human stuff that a lot of people sweep under the rug. So that, again, like that was kind of the seed that planted the idea of, well, let's actually start to open up this community, because a lot of men, you all can look, online, or just a quick Google search will tell you, I mean, the alarming stats that are out there about men's mental health, the huge discrepancy between, suicide rates between men and women, the loneliness epidemic, right? So they're lacking community, and a lot of them just aren't even quite sure how to enter one, or become part of something, and that's a vulnerable thing to do, as you mentioned, Mike. So it's my intention to, one, bring some awareness to around some of those statistics, and educate some people, and for two, to do something about it. So this community that is developing now is, we've got exercises in there. We've got, just forums where we can talk with one another, monthly meetups. So it's a community where men can really come together to become men of value, right? So it's rooted in, formal axiology, and this idea of, when we start thinking better, we can start doing better, and we can start being better, right? And that's really what the community is about, is just creating a space where people feel comfortable to come and do that.
Oh, that's great. And so what do you hope people gain from being part of that group? Is it just be, like you said, having that positive aura about themselves and starting to come out of this differently, or is it to make, having a friendship out of it? What is ultimately the main goal of the group.
Yeah. So I mean, definitely those two. I mean, one of the one of the things I wish we could measure, but maybe we can't for a good reason, is how you're feeling. And of course, we
Yeah.
can check in and hear about it. But if you're waking up feeling better each day about who you are and about how you're contributing to the world, I mean, that's a win in itself. But yeah, like, one of the main things is building community, so we can start doing something about this loneliness challenge that our country is facing. And lives are, if we're getting really down to the bottom of it, like, lives are at stake. I don't love talking about how many friends, or at least like extensions of, right, like, I
Right.
know who decided that this world isn't for them anymore because, right, they're so lonely. And again,
Right.
like, my counseling degree, and this is common knowledge for most folks, we're wired for it. We're wired for connection. We're not meant
Yeah.
to go through this world alone. So
Absolutely.
the amount of times, when we're in our monthly meetings together, where someone's like, damn, like, you feel that way too. I mean, that in itself is healing, right? Because so many people out there are feeling like they're the only one experiencing the challenges they are and facing the challenges they are. So yeah, the community part of it is huge. And then, there's an actual definition of men of value, so that's part of what my mission is too, is actually creating and developing men of value. And that's going to be in a unique way for each person's experience. But that core five group actually came up with a definition, and having displaying certain behaviors and having core concepts and tools to add to your tool belt to put you in a position to actually display them.
I love it, man. I applaud you for that, because I think that is so needed in our right now, and I hope that it expands and people can form regional groups, and it just goes nationwide, and we find community again, because the irony in all this is that we are more connected now from a technology standpoint, but yet still so disconnected, right? Like, we have data in our hands that could just prove to us that we're not alone in these things, that we're not, that it's not just happening to you, or it's not, but in our minds, we're like, oh, wow, that, the realism, the realization of it, that it's really happening to a lot of people.
Yeah.
They're just so disconnected of that. But the irony is that we have technology to prove otherwise, that you're not, but yet, there's such a disconnect. It's crazy when I think about it. But anyways, I want to throw out a couple rapid fire questions at you to make sure we cover everything that we wanted to cover before we wrap this up. So, what's one leadership myth you wish people would stop believing?
One leadership myth I wish people would stop believing is that there's a finish line. that there's a perfect leader, and that you're just gonna one day get it figured out.
And you're done, right? Yeah. Oh, I love that. Yeah. What's the best piece of advice you've ever received?
Not sure who this is from. Probably picked it up along, my spiritual practice, but be still and you will know. Right? Just making sure you're taking time to sit and breathe. Be still and you will know.
I like that. Be still and you will know. Man. Okay. And is there a book that really shaped the way you think about leadership or personal growth? Or I even open up, is there a favorite book that you would love others to?
Is it okay if I mention two?
Yeah, please.
Right on. So the first one is The Untethered Soul, and that's written by Michael Singer. And he really just talks about, in a really downloadable and digestible way, just kind of the human experience. And so that was actually a big opening to my meditation practice and my spirituality as well. So that book is a staple. And then the second one is actually Robert Hartman's book. And he wrote the book Freedom to Live. Okay. And, it talks a lot about what the title says, right? Like, we all want to be free from our thoughts, free to express ourselves, free to, contribute in the ways that feel good to us. And that's really what his mission was as he developed his work. So Freedom to Live by Robert Hartman is definitely another staple.
Okay. All right, good. So before we wrap up, if someone listening right now feels stuck in their career or their life direction, what's the first step they should take?
Write about it.
Okay.
I think that's a critical thing, and there's studies that show that when we actually physically write, there's more of the brain that's involved, and we start to uncover and reveal, some more clarity around things. But another thing, and this is a practical tool that I train people in my program, is using the central question of life, love, and leadership. And that question is, what choice can I make and action can I take in this moment to create the greatest net value? Right. So,
Does
and
it
that's
move
not,
the needle? So
yeah.
basically, does it? So for our business minded, high performer CEOs out there, does it move the needle? Would be my interpretation of it. But yeah,
Yeah. And to add to that, what's your needle pointing at? And again,
yeah,
back to that hierarchy of value is, sometimes we're so busy, sometimes we misjudge what is actually valuable, right? So if someone is, really hyper focused on being right about something or getting their way in a meeting, for example, that's diminishing other people's ideas, that's diminishing the creativity that could potentially come forward with a more collaborative approach,
right,
right? So net value, meaning win-win, right?
right,
So what's good, of course, for me, but also what's good for the people, places, and things outside of me, the other
right.
nouns. So that's, when we talk about net value at the end of that central question, that's what that's about. And
Oh,
you know, a lot of athletes, for example, are trained aggressively to win.
right. Yeah.
Right, so it's a little bit of a shift to think about, oh, we can all win, there's enough for us all here.
Hmm.
And that's more of an abundant mindset. And I know that's not everyone's point of view, which is okay. But, when we start shifting over to a win-win mentality and start asking ourselves that question, and by the way, super quick, Mike, questions really are helpful in activating more of your prefrontal cortex as well, right?
Right.
Versus an affirmation. You're disagreeing with yourself or having an argument with yourself. A
Right.
question is actually going to prompt critical thought, especially a question like that.
Mm,
So your mind is actually going to start seeking out a good answer, right? And it's not about getting it perfect. It's not
right.
about, doing it like you should. It's more so about just an inquiry alone. So that's what I would offer.
Oh, I love that, man. That's a lot of food for thought. So,
Yeah.
and for people who want to learn more about your work or connect with you, where should they go?
Yeah. My website is, has most information on it. So if people want to learn more about axiology, there's a little section on there. And then, yeah, kind of humanize myself even more on the website so you can kind of learn more about my philosophy. So that's just jordanwhitecoaching.com.
Okay.
And then I'm also on LinkedIn, and I believe that's how we connected, Mike.
Yeah.
So I'm there as well, and that's where I put or spend most of my social media time. And then thirdly, I'm on Substack, so I write bi-weekly articles there where I share more about some of this axiology stuff and the self leadership work that I do. So those are a few places that you can get in touch with me.
Wonderful, wonderful. And we'll have those in the show notes as well for the audience. Jordan White, thank you so much for coming on my podcast and for sharing your story. It's been a real pleasure.
Yeah, Mike, same, man. Thank you so much for having me. Definitely feel connected to you and the work you're doing. So thank you, and hopefully you feel acknowledged for
Absolutely.
what you're putting out in the world as
Thank
well.
you.
Thanks again for having me.
Absolutely. Thanks a lot.
Thanks for listening to I'm Up, He Sees Me, I'm Down. Follow the show for more conversations on leadership, faith, and resilience. Sponsored by Alamo Tech and Mission Solution Partners.